The training facility on Sentinel-9 station hummed with activity as security officers from a dozen different species practiced combat drills and weapons handling. Kyle Morrison stood near the observation window, watching the exercises with quiet attention. His diplomatic security uniform crisp and professional, despite the long shift. He had been assigned to Ambassador Lisa Greenwood's protection detail for 3 months now. Ever since humanity joined the Galactic Coalition, the work was straightforward most days: escort the ambassador to meetings, stand watch during negotiations, and coordinate with alien security forces who still seemed uncertain about these newcomers from Earth. Kyle noticed 4 alien officers gathering near the equipment racks. During the scheduled break, they spoke in the common galactic language that he had studied intensively before deployment. Their voices carried across the training floor with the casual confidence of warriors who believed themselves superior. The largest of the group was Commander Vectis, a Krenth whose species prided themselves on being the Coalition's finest soldiers. His thick scaled hide gleamed under the station's artificial lighting, and his 4 arms crossed in a gesture Kyle had learned meant dismissal or contempt. These humans rely too heavily on their projectile weapons, Vectis said to his companions, his translator rendering the words into something Kyle could understand perfectly. A Vaxel officer, sleek and quick-moving, nodded in agreement. I have observed their training sessions. They practice primarily with firearms and ranged tactics. Without their guns, I doubt they would pose much threat. The tour guide delegate, tall and multi-jointed, added his own observation. Their physiology suggests they are adapted for endurance rather than combat. Soft skin, limited natural defenses, moderate strength at best. The 4th member of the group, a Shelkari, whose species was known for analytical precision, consulted a datapad. My research indicates humans evolved as persistence hunters. They chase prey over long distances until it collapses from exhaustion. This is hardly the profile of a warrior species. Kyle maintained his neutral expression as he listened. He had heard variations of this assessment many times since arriving at the station. Most alien species judged combat capability by natural weapons, claws, armor, venom, or raw physical power. Humans had none of these advantages, and it showed in how others perceived them. Ambassador Lisa approached from the corridor entrance, with her aide Danny Chun following close behind. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who missed very little. Something interesting happening? She asked Kyle quietly. Just the usual assessments, ma'am. Kyle replied without looking away from the observation window. Lisa followed his gaze to the group of alien officers. They're talking about us again. Yes, ma'am. And you understand what they're saying? Every word. She smiled slightly. Should I be concerned? No, ma'am. Just typical peacocking. Below them. Commander Vectis's voice grew louder as he warmed to his subject. The humans are clever with technology. I grant them that. Their weapons are effective, and their ships are adequately designed. But strip away their tools, and what remains? Soft creatures who would struggle to survive one rotation on any proper world. The Vaxel officer gestured toward the human section of the training facility. Do they even practice close combat? I have seen no evidence of martial traditions among them. They have no natural weapons, the tour guide observed. No claws, no enhanced strength, no protective plating. How could they have developed effective close combat techniques? Kyle felt Danny step up beside him. The younger man had been listening as well, and his jaw was tight with frustration. You going to let them keep talking like that? Danny asked. They're entitled to their opinions. Kyle said calmly, yeah, but they're wrong. Then maybe someone should educate them. Ambassador Lisa raised an eyebrow. Kyle, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Only if it becomes necessary. M.A.A.M. As if on cue, the group below finished their conversation and began walking toward the exit. Their path took them directly past where Kyle stood. Commander Vectis noticed the human security officer, and something in the Krent's posture shifted. He had an audience now and wanted to make an impression. Human, Vectis said, his tone making the words sound like an insult. I have a question for you. Kyle turned to face the commander, his expression polite and professional. Sir, your species, can you actually fight without your precious guns? Or would you be helpless if someone took your weapons away? The other three officers moved closer, forming a loose semicircle. The training floor grew quieter as other personnel noticed the confrontation developing. Kyle kept his voice level and respectful. Humans have been fighting hand-to-hand for thousands of years before firearms were invented. We have extensive martial traditions. The Vaxil officer made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. Traditions, perhaps. But can you actually fight? Yes, Kyle answered simply. Commander Vectis uncrossed his arms and stepped closer, towering over Kyle by nearly 2 feet. I find that difficult to believe. Your species looks fragile, thin bones, soft tissue, no natural armor. What possible threat could you pose in actual combat? Kyle met the commander's gaze without flinching. Would you like a demonstration? A question hung in the air for a long moment. Vectis glanced at his companions, and Kyle could see the calculation happening. Refusing would suggest fear or uncertainty. Accepting would give the Krent commander a chance to publicly humiliate a human and prove his point. You would fight me? Vectis asked. If you want, Kyle replied. Though I should mention I'm willing to face all 4 of you at once if you prefer. That would make for a more thorough demonstration. Dead silence fell across the training floor. Every species present understood that Kyle had just issued a challenge that bordered on suicidal one. Human against 4 trained alien warriors. It was the kind of mismatch that should result in quick and embarrassing defeat. The Shelkari officer consulted his datapad again. The human is either incredibly foolish, or he possesses information we lack. Only one way to find out, the tour guy said. Commander Vectis' expression was difficult to read, but Kyle recognized satisfaction when he saw it. Very well. Human, we will use standard combat inhibitors to prevent serious injury. When you are defeated quickly, you can explain to your ambassador why you volunteered for humiliation. Understood, Kyle said. Ambassador Lisa touched his arm. Kyle, you don't have to do this. He looked at her and smiled slightly. Ma'am, I really do. They need to understand what humans are capable of. And if you lose, I won't. Danny moved to stand beside the ambassador. Should I call for medical backup? For them, probably, Kyle said. Then walked toward the center of the training floor where Commander Vectis was already activating the combat inhibitor field. The energy barrier shimmered to life, creating an arena roughly 20 meters across. The inhibitors would prevent lethal damage, but combatants would still feel impact and pain. The system was designed to measure defeat through knockout force or submission without permanent harm. Kyle stepped into the ring and began rolling his shoulders, loosening his muscles with practiced ease. The 4 alien officers entered from the opposite side, spreading out to surround him, while the growing crowd of spectators pressed closer to watch. Commander Vectis cracked his knuckles with all 4 hands. Last chance to withdraw, human. Kyle took a deep breath and settled into a ready stance, feet shoulder-width apart. Knees slightly bent, hands loose and open at his sides. His weight balanced perfectly on the balls of his feet. Whenever you're ready, he said. The Vaxil moved first. Its species was known for lightning-fast reflexes, and the officer demonstrated this reputation by launching forward in a blur of motion. Claws extended toward Kyle's throat. The attack was meant to be overwhelming, too fast for human reactions to counter. Kyle didn't retreat, and he didn't try to block the strike. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly to the left, while his right hand came up in a smooth arc. His palm connected with the Vaxil's wrist and redirected the momentum, while Kyle's left hand grabbed the alien's elbow. In one fluid motion, he pivoted his hips and executed a textbook shoulder throw that used the Vaxel's own speed against it. The alien hit the mat hard, and the combat inhibitor registered knockout-level impact immediately. A holographic indicator appeared above the fallen fighter showing he was eliminated from the bout. The entire exchange took less than 4 seconds. The crowd gasped in surprise, but Kyle had no time to acknowledge their reaction because the tour guy and Shellcurry were already attacking from opposite sides, attempting to use their superior numbers to overwhelm him through coordination. The tour guy's reach advantage meant his strikes could come from angles that would be impossible for most species. But Kyle had studied the anatomical files on every coalition species before deployment. He knew exactly how those extra joints functioned and where the weak points existed as the Torgay's elongated arms snaked toward him. Kyle closed the distance instead of retreating. He moved inside the alien's guard, where those long limbs became a disadvantage rather than an asset. His elbow strike targeted a nerve cluster located just below the Torgay's primary shoulder joint. Spot where 3 major neural pathways converged. The impact sent signals of overwhelming pain through the Torgay's system, and the alien crumpled as his limbs refused to respond. The combat inhibitor registered incapacitation and displayed another elimination indicator. Meanwhile, the VU Shellcurry had been calculating attack vectors using his species' advanced analytical abilities. Their minds processed combat situations like computers running tactical programs. But Kyle had learned something important during his years as a Marine Corps martial arts instructor. Computers needed patterns to predict, and humans could be beautifully unpredictable. Through a combination that made no tactical sense. According to standard doctrine, starting with a low kick that threatened the Shellcurry's forward leg, then flowing into a spinning back fist that should have left him vulnerable, finishing with a jumping knee strike that violated every principle of maintaining balance and defensive posture. The Shellcurry's prediction algorithms couldn't adapt fast enough to the chaotic sequence. The knee strike connected solidly with the alien's thorax, and the combat inhibitor registered knockout force. The Shellcurry collapsed, and his elimination indicator joined the other 2 total elapsed time, 11 seconds. Commander Vectus stood alone across from Kyle and the Krynth. Warrior's expression had transformed from confident superiority to something approaching concern. 3 of his companions lay defeated on the mat, while the human security officer hadn't even broken a sweat. The crowd pressed closer to the inhibitor field. Aliens from dozens of species watching with complete attention. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Humans were soft, weak, dependent on technology. Yet somehow this unremarkable-looking human had dismantled 3 trained warriors with effortless efficiency. Kyle reset his stance and waited. He wasn't breathing hard, and his expression remained calm and focused. It was the kind of controlled readiness that came from thousands of hours of practice. "You've been holding back," Vectus said, his translator carrying an edge of accusation. "Just using appropriate force." Kyle replied, "Your species has been hiding their capabilities." "No, we just don't brag about them." The Krynth commander's forearms spread wide in a combat stance. His species' traditional fighting form emphasized power and overwhelming force. They were natural grapplers with strength that could crush most opponents. "You won't find me as easy to defeat as the others." "Human, I know," Kyle said honestly. Vectus charged with surprising speed for his size, his massive form building momentum like a freight transport. He intended to simply bowl Kyle over and use his superior mass and strength to pin and pummel the smaller human into submission. Kyle watched the charge with the same quiet focus he had maintained throughout the fight. Timing was everything in this situation. React too early, and Vectus could adjust. Too late, and the impact would be devastating. even with the inhibitor field protecting against lethal damage. He waited until the last possible moment, then executed a technique that his instructor had called using the mountain's own weight against it. As Vectis reached for him, Kyle dropped low and to the side. His hands found purchase points on the commander's armor plating. Using leverage and circular motion, he redirected all that charging momentum into a throw that sent the Krent warrior tumbling across the map. But Vectis was a trained fighter, and he recovered quickly, rolling back to his feet with impressive agility for someone his size. The commander came in more cautiously this time, using his forearms to create a web of strikes that would be impossible for a two-armed opponent to fully counter. Kyle didn't try to block everything. Instead, he focused on defense positioning that minimized damage while he looked for openings. A punch slipped past his guard and caught him in the ribs. The impact would have been devastating without the inhibitor, but even with the protective field, it drove the air from his lungs. He used the moment of contact to grab Vectis's arm and execute a joint lock. The principle was simple: find the angle where the limb could only bend one way and apply pressure in the opposite direction. It didn't matter how strong someone was. Joints had mechanical limits. Vectis roared in pain and swung with another arm to break the hold. Kyle released and flowed into a different position, targeting another joint with a technique from Aikido, then transitioning to a submission hold that would have made his old judo instructor proud. The commander struggled with all his considerable strength, but leverage is leverage regardless of how much muscle you have. Kyle applied steady pressure until the combat inhibitor registered that Vectis was caught in an inescapable position. Yield, Kyle said quietly for a moment. Vectis continued to struggle, but the pain was intensifying, and he finally made the gesture that meant submission in Krent culture. The combat inhibitor immediately released its constraint and displayed the final elimination. Indicator total fight time: 23 seconds. Kyle stood and stepped back, offering his hand to help Vectis up. The gesture seemed to surprise the Krent commander, but after a moment, he accepted and allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. The training facility was absolutely silent. Dozens of alien observers stood frozen as they processed what they had just witnessed. A single human had defeated 4 trained security officers from 4 different species in less than half a minute. Then someone in the crowd began a gesture of respect, and older Quellen, whose species was known for strategic brilliance. Elder Morven raised his primary appendages in the traditional salute for warriors who had proven themselves. Others gradually joined until most of the facility was offering signs of acknowledgement. Ambassador Lisa and Danny Chun approached as the inhibitor field deactivated. The ambassador's expression was carefully neutral, but Kyle could see approval in her eyes. "That was quite a demonstration," she said, "just showing them what humans can do." "Ma'am," Kyle replied. Commander Vectis stood nearby, examining his arms where the joint locks had been applied. The Shelkari officer had recovered enough to access his datapad and was frantically updating his files. The Vaxil and Torgai were sitting up looking stunned. Danny couldn't suppress his grin. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." More aliens began approaching with questions, wanting to understand how such efficiency was possible. Security chiefs from various species suddenly very interested in human combat capabilities. Kyle found himself surrounded by curious officers, all speaking at once. Elder Morven made his way through the crowd with dignified purpose. "Human Kyle Morrison, I would speak with you about what I have witnessed." "Yes, sir," Kyle said respectfully. "Your species. This is common training among you, among security and military personnel." "Yes, sir." "And in your assessment, where would you rank your own abilities compared to other human fighters?" Kyle considered the question carefully. "I'm competent, sir, well-trained, but not exceptional. There are millions of humans who train in martial arts. Many of them would be more skilled than me. The Quellan elder's expression shifted to something Kyle couldn't quite read. You are saying that what we witnessed represents average human capability. In my field, yes, sir. Special forces operators and dedicated martial artists would be significantly more capable. A ripple of reaction passed through the gathered aliens. The idea that Kyle represented merely average human combat ability seemed to genuinely disturb several species, Commander. Vectis approached, and Kyle turned to face him. The Krenth warrior's posture was different, now less arrogant. More thoughtful. I underestimated you, Vectis said bluntly. Yes, Kyle agreed. But that's why we did the demonstration. So you'd understand. Your species has more to offer the Coalition than we recognized. We're here to be partners, not subordinates. Vectis made a gesture that might have been agreement or acknowledgement. The video footage spread through galactic networks faster than Kyle had anticipated. Someone in the training facility had recorded the entire demonstration, and within hours every major species in the Coalition had seen the 23-second fight. Kyle sat in Ambassador Elisa's office 3 days later while she REVIEWED reports about the reactions pouring in from across known space. Danny stood near the window watching ships dock at the station's various ports. The Krenth High Command is not pleased, Lisa said, scanning through her datapad. They're calling it propaganda and suggesting we staged the whole thing. We have dozens of witnesses from multiple species. Danny pointed out, facts don't always matter when pride is at stake, Lisa replied. The Krenth have built their reputation on being the Coalition's premier warriors. Having one of their commanders defeated so decisively by a human undermines that carefully constructed image. Kyle remained quiet and let the ambassador think through the political implications. He had done what needed to be done, but he understood there would be consequences. On the other hand, Lisa continued, we've received formal requests from 17 different species asking about human combat training programs. Elder Morven sent a particularly interesting proposal about establishing a cultural exchange focused on martial traditions. What did you tell them? Kyle asked. I told them I needed to consult with Earth Command first. But personally, I think it's a good opportunity. We need all eyes out here, and sharing. Knowledge builds trust. Danny turned from the window. Have you seen the analysis pieces being published? Some of these commentators are genuinely scared. There's one Vaxel researcher claiming humans represent a potential existential threat to galactic stability. Because I won a training demonstration? Kyle said with disbelief. Because you won so easily, Danny corrected. They're doing the math now. If one human security officer can defeat 4 trained alien fighters without breaking a sweat, what could a full human military force accomplish? What about the special forces operators you mentioned? What about soldiers trained specifically for war rather than protective duty? Lisa set down her datapad and looked at Kyle directly. The Galactic Information Network wants to interview you. They're offering prime broadcast time and maximum distribution. To say what? To explain human combat capabilities in your own words. To put a face on what everyone just witnessed and hopefully calm some of the more extreme reactions. Kyle considered this carefully. Will it help our position in the Coalition? It might. Or it might make things worse if you say the wrong thing. But I think transparency is our best option right now. The speculation and fear will only grow if we stay silent. Then I'll do it. The interview took place in one of the station's media suites 2 days later. The host was a Quellan journalist named Wheeler, who had a reputation for fairness and thorough research. Kyle wore his diplomatic security uniform and tried to project calm professionalism. Officer Morrison. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. Wheeler began once the cameras were active. Happy to? Sir, the footage of your demonstration has been viewed billions of times across the Coalition. Most species had no idea humans possessed such combat capabilities. Can you explain how you were able to defeat 4 trained warriors so quickly? Kyle had prepared for this question with Ambassador Elisa's help. The techniques I used come from martial arts that humans have developed over thousands of years. Different cultures on Earth created different fighting systems. Judo from Japan, Aikido, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai from Thailand, various Chinese Kung Fu styles, and many others. These are all human martial arts? Valor asked. Just a few examples. There are hundreds of distinct styles and thousands of variations. Humans have been studying combat for our entire history. But your species lacks natural weapons. No claws or armor or enhanced strength. How did you develop such effective fighting techniques without these advantages? Maybe because we didn't have those advantages. Kyle said thoughtfully. We had to become really good at using leverage, timing, and technique to overcome opponents who might be bigger or stronger. We learned to use an enemy's own force against them, to target weak points, to move efficiently. Valor consulted his notes. You told Elder Morven that you consider yourself merely competent by human standards. Can you elaborate on that? This was the delicate part. I'm well trained for my role in diplomatic security, but I'm not an elite fighter by human military standards. Every human military branch has specialized close combat instructors. Special forces operators train intensively in multiple martial arts. There are competitive athletes who dedicate their entire lives to perfecting one specific style. So there are humans significantly more capable than you in combat. Many thousands of them. Yes, Kyle could see the reaction in Velar's expression. Quellen was recalculating his understanding of human capabilities in real time. What would you say to species that find this revelation concerning? There are commentators suggesting humans may pose a threat to coalition stability. Kyle leaned forward slightly. I'd say they're misunderstanding our intentions. Humans didn't join the coalition to dominate anyone. We joined to learn, to share, to work alongside other species toward common goals. Yes, we can fight, and yes, we've gotten very good at it over millennia of necessity. But that doesn't define us. What does define humanity then? Our desire to protect others, our curiosity about the universe, our belief that cooperation achieves more than conquest. The techniques I demonstrated aren't about domination. They're about defense and discipline. Most human martial arts emphasize respect, self-control, and using force only when necessary. Commander Vectis has stated publicly that he wishes to learn from you. Is this common in human culture? Teaching potential rivals. We don't see sharing knowledge as creating rivals. We see it as building partnerships. If Commander Vectis learns human techniques, and I learn Krenth combat philosophy, we both become more effective at protecting what matters. That makes the coalition stronger overall. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, but Kyle felt that exchange had been the crucial moment. Whether it would calm concerns or inflame them remained to be seen back in the diplomatic wing. Kyle found Commander Vectis waiting outside his quarters. The Krenth warrior looked uncomfortable in the narrow corridor designed for smaller species. Commander, is there something I can help you with? I watched your interview, Vectis said. You spoke well with honesty and without arrogance. I tried to be truthful. That is not always valued in politics. But I appreciate it. Vectis paused, then continued. I must tell you something. The Krenth High Command is not accepting the demonstration as legitimate. They are planning something to restore our reputation. What kind of something? I don't have details yet, but I know my people. They will not let this perceived humiliation stand unanswered. I wanted to warn you because despite my defeat, I have come to respect you. Kyle appreciated the gesture. Thank you for the warning. Do you think they'll target me specifically? Possibly. Or they may create a larger incident that allows them to demonstrate Krenth superiority in a more controlled context. Either way, I believe trouble is coming. I'll inform Ambassador Lisa. There is something else, Vectis said, his tone becoming more formal. Regardless of what my high command does, I meant what I said about learning from you. I have been a warrior my entire life, and I thought I understood combat. But what you showed me, that efficiency, that use of leverage and timing, it revealed gaps in my knowledge. I'd be honored to teach you what I know, Kyle said. And I'd like to learn about Krenth combat traditions in return. You would learn from someone you defeated. Every fighter has something to teach. Victory in one match doesn't mean I know everything about combat. Your strength and resilience are impressive, and your recovery speed during our fight showed excellent training. Vectis made a gesture of appreciation. Perhaps this is why Elder Morven speaks so highly of human philosophy. You seem to understand that growth comes from learning, rather than proving superiority. They arranged a training schedule, and Vectis departed looking more thoughtful than troubled. Kyle immediately went to Ambassador Lisa's office to report the warning about potential Krenth retaliation. Lisa listened carefully, then pulled up star charts showing ship movements near the station. Interesting. There's a Krenth warship scheduled to arrive next week, ostensibly for routine patrol. But the timing seems suspicious now. Should we request increased security? Not yet. That might provoke exactly the kind of incident they're looking for. But I'll inform Earth Command and put our people on alert. She studied Kyle for a moment. You've handled this well. You know, the fight, the interview. Even befriending Vectis despite the political tension. I'm just trying to do my job, ma'am. Your job was to protect me. Instead, you've become the face of human-alien relations and possibly prevented a larger conflict through honest communication, or possibly started one. Time will tell, Lisa agreed. But I'd rather have people understand what humans are capable of than continue to underestimate us. Underestimation leads to miscalculation, and miscalculation leads to conflict. Danny entered carrying a datapad. You need to see this. Elder Morven just submitted a formal proposal to the Coalition Council. He wants to establish a permanent exchange program bringing human marshal. Elder Morven's proposal passed the Coalition Council with surprising support, and 3 weeks after the demonstration, Kyle found himself standing in front of 30 alien security officers who had voluntarily signed up for his first official training session. The group represented 12 different species, each with their own physiology and natural combat abilities. Kyle had spent the previous week studying anatomical data and movement patterns to figure out how to adapt human martial arts principles to bodies that didn't work like his commander. Vectis stood near the front of the group, having become something of an unofficial assistant after their private training sessions. The Krenth warrior had proven to be an eager student once his pride stopped getting in the way. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming, Kyle began, keeping his tone conversational rather than authoritative. Before we start, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to teach you to fight like humans. I'm here to share principles that might enhance your existing combat traditions. A young Shelkari officer raised an appendage. But human techniques defeated Krenth techniques. Doesn't that prove human methods are superior? Kyle shook his head. It proves I was better prepared for that specific situation. Commander Vectis is an excellent warrior, and Krenth combat doctrine is effective. I just had advantages he didn't expect. That's different from being fundamentally superior. Vectis spoke up. He is correct. I approached that fight with arrogance and assumptions. I have been training with Officer Morrison since then, and I can tell you that Krenth strength, combined with human leverage techniques, is more effective than either approach alone. That's the goal, Kyle said. Finding ways to combine your natural advantages with efficiency principles. Now let's start with something basic, using an opponent's momentum against them. He demonstrated with Vectis, showing how a smaller fighter could redirect a larger opponent's charge. The key wasn't strength, but timing and positioning. Kyle walked them through the mechanics step by step, explaining the physics involved in simple terms when Commander Vectis charges. He builds momentum that's mass times velocity becoming kinetic energy. If I try to stop that energy directly, I get crushed because he outweighs me significantly. But if I redirect it, changing the direction without stopping the motion, I only need enough force to alter the angle. The alien officers watched with fascination as Kyle demonstrated repeatedly, each time pointing out exactly where his hands went, how his feet moved, and why the technique worked. "Your turn," he said. "Pair up with someone from a different species, if possible. I want you to feel how the principles work with different body types." The training floor became a controlled chaos of attempting throws and redirects. Kyle moved between pairs, offering corrections and encouragement. He noticed that species with multiple limbs often struggled with the circular motion because their instinct was to use all their appendages. Simultaneously, focus on one or two primary limbs for the Philios technique, he suggested to a tour guide officer. Save the others for balance or follow-up actions. Too many moving parts can make you slower rather than faster. A Vaxil officer raised an interesting question. "Officer Morrison, these techniques emphasize defense and redirection. What about offensive strikes?" "Good question," Kyle said. "Let me show you something about targeting." He pulled up a holographic display showing generalized alien anatomy. Every species here has different vulnerabilities, but there are some universal principles. Nerve clusters exist where limbs connect to the body. Joints have limits on their range of motion, regardless of species. Sensory organs are typically vulnerable because they need to be exposed to function. He demonstrated on the hologram how to identify high-value targets based on structural weaknesses rather than species-specific knowledge. You don't need to memorize every alien anatomy. You need to understand biomechanics well enough to recognize weak points when you see them. The class continued for 2 hours, and Kyle covered basic concepts about balance, leverage, timing, and efficient movement. He ended with what he considered the most important lesson. All of this technique is valuable, but there's something more fundamental I want you to understand, he said as the group gathered around. Martial arts aren't really about fighting. They're about discipline, awareness, and self-control. The best fighters are the ones who can end conflicts without violence, who use force only when absolutely necessary to protect others. "This seems contradictory," a young officer said. "Why train so hard in combat if the goal is to avoid combat?" Kyle smiled. "Because being capable of violence and choosing not to use it is different from being incapable. When you know you can defend yourself and others, you don't need to prove it constantly. You can be calm and reasonable because you're not operating from fear or insecurity." Elder Morven had been observing from the viewing area, and he descended to the training floor as the class ended. "A fine demonstration, Officer Morrison. I particularly appreciated your emphasis on principles over specific techniques." "Thank you." "Sir, walk with me. There is something I wish to discuss." They moved to a choir section of the facility while the other students filed out. Morven's expression was serious. "The Krenth warship arrives tomorrow. I'm aware. My intelligence sources suggest they are carrying a special combat unit elite shock troops who will seek to publicly challenge human fighters and restore Krenth prestige." Kyle had been expecting something like this based on Vectis's warning. "Do we know their specific plan?" "Not precisely, but I suspect they will create a situation where refusing to fight would appear cowardly, likely during the official welcome ceremony where maximum witnesses will be present. So refusing isn't really an option." "Not if humanity wants to maintain its position in the coalition," Morven confirmed. "Perception matters greatly in galactic politics. If humans appear weak or unwilling to defend their honor after making such bold claims about combat capability, it will undermine everything you've achieved. How many fighters should I expect? Unknown. But Krenth shock troops operate in units of 6. They are trained from birth for combat and enhanced with military-grade augmentation. they will be significantly more dangerous than Commander Vectis. Kyle processed this information. I'll inform Ambassador Lisa. There is another consideration, Morven said carefully. If you defeat these shock troops as decisively as you defeated Commander Vectis, it may further humiliate the Krenth and damage relations. But if you refuse or lose, it damages humanity's standing. This is a situation with no clean solution. What would you recommend? Fight with honor. Win if you can, but show respect to your opponents. Make it clear through your actions that humans seek cooperation, not domination. The manner of victory matters as much as the victory itself. Kyle returned to the diplomatic wing and briefed Ambassador Lisa on everything Morven had shared. She listened with her usual composed attention, then called in Danny and the other human security personnel. So we're looking at a forced confrontation tomorrow, Lisa said once everyone was assembled. Kyle, I'm not ordering you to fight if you don't want to. We can find another way to handle this. With respect, ma'am. Elder Morven is right about perception. If I back down now, it undermines everything. Besides, I'm curious to see what Krenth shock troops can actually do. Danny looked worried. These aren't going to be like Vectis and his friends. Shock troops are professional soldiers with combat augmentation. I know, Kyle said. But the principles don't change. Leverage works regardless of how strong someone is. Timing matters more than speed. And technique can overcome raw physical advantages. You sound very confident for someone who might be facing 6 augmented warriors simultaneously. Kyle shrugged. I've trained for worse scenarios. Marine Corps' close combat training includes multiple attackers, weapons, and environmental hazards. 6 opponents in a controlled setting with safety protocols isn't the worst situation I've prepared for. Lisa studied him for a long moment. You really think you can win? I think I can show them that humans deserve respect. Whether that counts as winning depends on your definition. The next morning dawned with typical station activity, but everyone in the diplomatic community knew something significant was brewing. The Krenth warship docked exactly on schedule, and its crew began disembarking for the official welcome ceremony. Kyle stood in his dress uniform with the other human personnel. Ambassador Lisa at the center of their delegation. The ceremony took place in one of the station's large assembly halls, with representatives from dozens of species in attendance. The Krenth delegation entered with military precision. Their leader was a high commander named Thorak, who radiated authority and barely contained aggression. His shock troop unit followed behind 6 warriors who looked like they had been sculpted specifically for violence. Thorak gave the traditional greetings and accepted the station commander's welcome. Then his gaze swept the assembled delegates and stopped on Kyle with obvious intent. I have heard interesting stories about human combat. Capability Asharik announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Tales of a single human defeating multiple trained warriors in seconds. Quite impressive if true. Ambassador Lisa stepped forward. Smoothly, High Commander, we're pleased to demonstrate human Krenth cooperation and exchange. I speak of combat. Ambassador, not cooperation, Thorak interrupted. My warriors wish to test these. The Krenth warship's combat deck was significantly larger than the training facility on Sentinel-9 and clearly designed for their species' preferences. High ceilings to accommodate their size, reinforced flooring rated for heavy impacts, and observation galleries where the crew could watch training exercises. Kyle walked onto the deck surrounded by witnesses from multiple species who had followed from the ceremony. Ambassador Lisa stayed close with Danny and the other human security personnel. Commander Vectis had positioned himself near the observation rail with Elder Morven. Both looking concerned, the 6 Krenth shock troops stood in a line, each one larger and more heavily muscled than Vectis had been. Their combat augmentations were visible reinforced skeletal structure, showing through transparent sections of their armor, enhanced neural interfaces. metabolic boosters that would increase their speed and strength beyond natural limits. High Commander, Thorak activated the combat inhibitor field personally. The rules are simple: fight until one side yields or is eliminated. My warriors will show the galaxy what true Krenth combat capability looks like. Kyle stepped into the ring and began his usual pre-fight routine, rolling his shoulders and settling his breathing. The shock troops spread out to surround him with professional spacing that showed extensive training in coordinated assault. 6 augmented soldiers against 1 unaugmented human. Someone in the crowd murmured, "This seems excessive." "That's the point," another voice responded. "They want to crush him to make a statement." Kyle blocked out the commentary and focused on assessing his opponents. They moved with the disciplined coordination of a unit that had trained together for years. Their augmentations gave them advantages he couldn't match in raw physical capability. But advantages weren't the same as victory. The fight began without ceremony. All 6 shock troops attacked simultaneously with overwhelming force. This wasn't like the demonstration with Vectis, where opponents came at him 1 or 2 at a time. This was a coordinated military assault designed to give him no breathing room. Kyle moved, his years of training against multiple opponents taking over. He couldn't meet their strength directly, so he didn't try. Instead, he flowed between them like water finding paths through obstacles, using their own coordination against them. When 2 shock troops attacked from opposite sides, Kyle timed his movements so they nearly collided with each other when one committed to a powerful strike. He used minimal deflection to redirect it into another opponent's path. He turned their greatest advantage, their unit cohesion, into a liability by making them get in each other's way. But these weren't the same as security officers who trained part-time. These were warriors who fought for living, and their augmentations meant they could maintain this intensity far longer than normal fighters. Kyle took hits that, even with the combat inhibitors protection, sent pain radiating through his body. He targeted joints and nerve clusters, like he had against Vectis. But the shock troops' augmented endurance meant techniques that would incapacitate normal fighters. Only slowed these warriors temporarily. He needed to adapt his strategy instead of trying to eliminate them one by one. Kyle focused on breaking their coordination. He deliberately created chaos by using throws that sent 1 shock trooper tumbling into 2 others, by positioning himself so their attacks would interfere with each other, by moving unpredictably enough that their tactical algorithms couldn't establish reliable patterns. The fight became a brutal test of endurance and will. The shock troops were stronger and faster, but Kyle was more efficient with his movement. They were trained to overwhelm opponents through relentless pressure, but he had learned to fight when exhausted, hurt, and outnumbered. Minutes passed, far longer than his previous demonstration, and Kyle could feel fatigue building in his muscles. But he could also see the shock troops beginning to show frustration as their coordinated assault failed to quickly subdue him. 1 shock trooper overextended on an attack, and Kyle seized the opportunity, executing a complex combination that used the warrior's own momentum, plus a perfectly timed joint lock to force a submission. The combat inhibitor registered elimination, and the first shock trooper went down. The remaining 5 adjusted their tactics immediately, but Kyle had broken their perfect coordination. Now, they were reactive instead of proactive, responding to him rather than dictating the pace. He caught the second one with a sacrifice throw that required taking a hit from a third opponent but resulted in elimination when the thrown shock trooper's head impacted the deck with inhibitor-registered knockout force. 2 down meant better odds. Even if Kyle's ribs were screaming in protest, the fight shifted momentum. The shock troops were still dangerous, but doubt had entered their movement. They had expected to dominate quickly, and instead found themselves in an extended battle against an opponent who refused to quit. Kyle eliminated the third with a chokehold that took advantage of universal physiology, cutting blood flow to the brain. Worked regardless of species and held it, despite taking punishing strikes from the other two, until the inhibitor registered unconsciousness. 3. Left, and Kyle was bleeding from a cut above his eye where one strike had gotten through. His breathing was labored and every movement hurt, but the shock troops were also showing fatigue. Augmentations could only carry you so far before basic biology demanded rest. Caught one in a leg lock that hyperextended the knee joint beyond safe limits. The combat inhibitor immediately registered severe damage and eliminated that warrior. 2 remaining, and both were slowing down. Their augmentation boosted stamina, finally reaching its limits. The final 2 attacked with desperate intensity, throwing aside their tactical training in favor of overwhelming force. Kyle met them with techniques that sacrificed defense for offense, accepting hits in order to land decisive strikes of his own. Eliminated the 5th shock trooper with a spinning elbow strike to the temple that registered as knockout impact. 1 opponent left, and Kyle could barely stand, but neither could the final shock trooper. They circled each other with mutual respect, both warriors who had given everything in this fight. The shock trooper made one final charge, and Kyle responded with the last of his energy, using a throw that sent both of them to the deck. The combat inhibitor took a moment to calculate, then registered the shock trooper as eliminated, while Kyle retained consciousness. By the narrowest of margins, the fight was over. Total time, 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Kyle had defeated all 6 Krenth shock troops. The observation deck erupted in reaction, some species cheering, others expressing disbelief. High Commander Thorak stood frozen with an expression that mixed shock, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect. Kyle forced himself to stand, despite every muscle protesting. He walked to each fallen shock trooper and offered assistance in rising. Most accepted. After a moment's hesitation, Ambassador Lisa rushed onto the combat deck with Danny right behind her. "Kyle, are you all right? Probably need medical attention." I am, but I'll live," Kyle said, then had to grab Danny's shoulder to keep from falling as his legs decided they were done supporting him. High Commander Thorak descended from the observation area, his expression still difficult to read. He studied Kyle for a long moment before speaking. "I came here expecting to prove human combat claims were exaggerated," Thorak said. "Instead, you have defeated my finest warriors and earned something I rarely give my respect. They fought with honor." "Sir," Kyle said, "your warriors are skilled and brave. They just encountered techniques they hadn't trained against. You could have humiliated them by making it look easy. Instead, you fought with everything you had and show my troops the respect of treating them as dangerous opponents, because they are dangerous opponents. Augmented Krenth shock troops are no joke. I'm pretty sure I have at least 3 cracked ribs." Thorak made a gesture that might have been approval. "You are correct about your injuries, and you will receive proper medical care. But first, I have something to say in front of these witnesses." He raised his voice to address the assembled crowd. "I came here to restore Krenth prestige, but I see now that prestige built on intimidation is hollow. This human has shown me that true strength comes from discipline, efficiency, and the willingness to stand against overwhelming odds without backing down." Thorak turned back to Kyle. "The Krenth High Command will accept Ambassador Greenwood's proposal for training exchange. We have much to learn from humanity, and perhaps much to teach in return. Cooperation serves us better than competition." Elder Morven descended to the combat deck looking pleased. "A wise decision, High Commander. This is what I hoped would result from today's events." Commander Vectus joined them and helped support Kyle's other side. "I tried to warn you it would be harder than the demonstration." "You weren't kidding," Kyle said. Then looked at the 6 shock troops who were being checked by medical personnel. "They're really good, if I'd fought them one at a time instead of using their coordination against them. I probably would have lost, but you didn't fight them one at a time, Vectis pointed out. You recognized their advantage and found a way to turn it into a weakness. That is what I have learned from training with you. Combat is about thinking as much as physical capability. Ambassador Lisa addressed High Commander Thorak directly. Honored by your decision to join the exchange,